All right, here we go. On the way over, I had some troubling news. A friend of mine called, said his almost 2-year-old started chewing on electrical cords at his house. He said he got in trouble, so he had to ground him. He said it was shocking to the family, but currently he's conducting himself properly, so that was good. We're glad to hear that. So when we're talking about reasons for the inspiration of the Bible, here's what you would have to do. What you're claiming is that the Bible is inspired by the all-knowing, all-powerful Creator God. And so if you're going to prove that to somebody, what do you give them that shows them this is not written by humans? Well, there are basically about 4 lines of evidence, and you could extend this and stretch it a little bit. But the number one thing you show is that everything in the Bible is always right when you can check it. Now, that means the history, and you can show all the archaeological evidence. That means the future statements, and you can show the predictive prophecy. And that means the statements about things that there's no way the writers could have known, but later we found out were exactly right. And that's called the scientific foreknowledge of the Bible. Now, here's the problem with people and science. We're told that, hey, you people who believe in the Bible, you are just gullible people, and you check your brains at the door, and you come in and let the preacher dump whatever he wants to in there, and you don't listen to modern scientific teaching. And modern scientific teaching has shown that there was a huge explosion that brought about the entire world, and that all the animals and life came from one single cell that somehow spontaneously generated from non-living chemicals, and we've got modern scientific evidence that disproves the Bible. That's what you're told. What we're going to see is that that's the furthest thing from the truth, and that real science always corresponds with a proper understanding of the Bible, and that humans are historically terrible at getting all the scientific information correct. We get a lot of it right, sometimes, and some of the stuff we get wrong doesn't matter, but sometimes we get some stuff really wrong that really matters. You know, right now we have 100,000 people every year that die because we thought it was a great idea to mine this stuff out of the ground and to put it in sheets and to put it on our walls of our factories because it doesn't burn, and to wrap it around every wire in a medical vehicle, in a military vehicle for years because it didn't burn. And I've talked to guys that used to cut asbestos sheets, basically a 4x8 sheet, and they would have a circular saw, and they'd be sawing it without a mask or anything. Well, why do you say, oh man, that was a great thing, wasn't it? No, it was terrible. We didn't know what we were doing wrong. And that's what you expect from humans. We get some things right, but lots of times we get things wrong. Now, I'll give you an example of what was going on in the time of Moses when he was writing. The Egyptians were some of the most well-known, well-studied physicians in the history of the world. In fact, you'll probably recognize the name Darius the Mede, who is a central figure in the book of Daniel. Darius had 2 Egyptian physicians with him at all times, because they were world-renowned as the very best doctors in the whole known world at the time. And we have uncovered a papyrus called the Ebers Papyrus. Fascinating piece of work. It's got, I think, over 600 different prescriptions for stuff on it. And some of them are really good and would help you in modern times right now. The bark of certain trees that you take off and you pummel them in one of those little apothecary things, and you take that and you put it with that, works great. So about 1/3 of them are like that. Another 1/3 of them are neutral. They wouldn't hurt you. In fact, if the doctor was convincing enough, you might get the placebo effect and it might actually help you. He might tell you that this is going to work, and you might believe that it's going to work, and you go home and do it because you believe it's going to work. It works. Okay, great. Neutral, wouldn't hurt you, but another about third of them, well, they're not neutral. In fact, some of them are very dangerous, and some of them are fatal. I'll give you an example. When I was growing up, there was something my parents had told me that you could get this, and I was scared to death of getting this. Number one, because we grew up kind of on a farm, and if there was a rusty nail, we tried to step on it, and or at least stab our brother with it, or whatever. And tetanus, we were told if you got tetanus and didn't take care of it, you could get lockjaw. And there's two things I love to do: eat and talk. Love to do both of those. And lockjaw was going to mean I couldn't do either one of those, and might kill me. And so I thought, okay, avoiding that. And I mean, you go to the emergency room, you stab yourself with a rusty nail. They say, when's the last time you had a tetanus shot? You know what you don't remember? When the last time you had a tetanus shot was. You know who does remember better than you? Your mom does. Because I would be like, I don't know, I think I had one 2 years ago. We were in here. She's like, Kyle, that cut was 6 years ago. Okay, no, I better have. Now, here's a good thing about a tetanus shot. Good thing about a tetanus shot is you can't have too many of them. You literally could go and get one every year, and that would be fine. But you can't have too few. You got to have one at least, every 10 years or so, and I wouldn't push it. So if you happen to step on a rusty nail or stab yourself with something that is a metal, all right, so if you were in ancient Egypt around the time of Moses, and you went to the most educated doctors in the world and asked them, hey, I've got a terrible splinter in my finger. It's so deep down in there, I can't get it out. What do I need to do about it? They would say, thanks for coming. I know exactly what you need to do. I got this poultice right here, and you need to wrap your finger up with this stuff right here. And they give it to you. And you smell it. About knocks you out. And they say, hey, just trust me. We know how to produce pus, and pus is great for you. In fact, the guys who are writing about this years ago, the book that I got some of this information out of is called None of These Diseases. It's a couple medical doctors that have a statement where they say the Egyptians thought this about pus: good and laudable pus. They thought it was great that your body produced that. And so the poultice is of worm, blood, and donkey manure. And you just wrap that around where you got that bad splinter, and you let it fester as much pus as possible, and you get tetanus. They were literally injecting tetanus into splinter patients. And you're looking at that like you got some superiority, because we were killing people with asbestos and thalidomide and you name it, because we thought it was a good idea, and that was 3,500 years after them. Okay, so if humans wrote any medical prescriptions in the Bible, what would you expect? Get some of them right, some of them neutral, some of them wrong. Any scientific information, some of it right, some of it, we can't check it, some of it wrong. And yet when you go to the Bible, you never find any scientific or medical or physical statements that it makes that are ever wrong. Now, I'm going to give you just a kind of a list of those. It's kind of just a shotgun approach that we'll go through, and I'll show you some of them. I want you to turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 1. And in Genesis chapter 1, you're going to read what has come to be understood in experimental biology as the absolute most experimentally valid scientific statement, biologically speaking, that can be uttered. But tragically, that a lot of people say isn't true. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that. Charles Darwin, when he talked about on the origin of species by natural selection, they basically queried to him, well, okay, how did life start? And he said, well, I think there was maybe a warm chemical soup about 200 million years ago that lightning struck it and caused the first chemicals to get together in the first simple cell. Now, here was the problem that Darwin had in 1859. His problem was he thought it was a simple cell. He thought it really was a blob of jello, that there wasn't anything going on really in it, that it was just a little singular, almost like a Lego, that is just a building block for the next thing. That was problematic because when you now look in the simple cell, have you seen a picture of one lately, a graph of one lately with the various structures and the 6-foot long DNA that is in every single cell, and then you got the Golgi bodies, and you have all of the cell membrane, and these little things open the doors to let some things in, and they close the doors to keep some things out, and then you have the mitochondria, which are the ones that keep the powerhouses of the cell, and they produce energy, and over here you got these little factories that are producing different proteins. It's not simple. In fact, it's so unsimple that you can present any scientist in the world with an entire set of the stuff, a dead cell. You got all the stuff in there, and just say, hey, make this work. And you can't even make a dead one work with all the stuff there already. Okay, so Darwin said, hey, yeah, lightning hit some stuff, and that stuff made the first little blob of something, and boom, this is how we got everything. People literally thought that life spontaneously generated, or the word abiogenesis is not biogenesis, meaning life comes from non-living chemicals. They literally thought that for thousands of years. In the 1600s, if you went to the most brilliant people in the world and said, where does life come from? They would say, well, some of it just spontaneously generates from non-living chemicals. And you would say, can I have some evidence for that? And they would say, yes, we have plenty of evidence for that. If you will take a T-bone steak and smack it on your kitchen counter, you know what, no, we're going to eat the T-bone. Take a sirloin. Take an old, hard sirloin that's not tender. Put it on your kitchen counter. In the middle of the summer, leave your window open. Come back in 2 weeks. What will you have on that steak? Maggots. Okay, now, did you see any maggots crawl onto it? Did you see any maggots fall out of the sky onto it? No, you did not. And so they spontaneously generated from the chemical properties of the air in the steak. Now, okay, why are you laughing at that? In 1600, the most brilliant minds in the world, people with IQs higher than ours, thought that. So this one guy did this ridiculously complicated experiment. I mean, it takes, you almost have to have a PhD from some type of higher source of education to even understand the experiment. Guy's name was Francisco Redi, or Redi. He was a French scientist. Here's what he did. Took some jars, put them over here, put some meat in the bottom of them. Didn't seal them. Took some jars over here, put some meat in the bottom, sealed them. I know it's complicated. Work with me, though. All right, flies landed on the jar. In the meat of the jars that were unsealed, maggots formed. They couldn't get in the hermetically airtight sealed meat. No maggots. He said, guys, I'll tell you what. I think we've been wrong about this. I think flies are producing maggots. They said, nope. Your problem is you didn't let air get into that. Air is the chemical stuff that makes life. The steak in the air. He said, okay, hold on, let's try it again. So jars unsealed meat, jars sealed meat. Took a set of jars, put them in the middle, and put some gauze type netting, like medical gauze substance where air could go through, but flies couldn't. Maggots formed on the meat that was unsealed. They couldn't get into the meat that was sealed. They laid their eggs on the netting. Maggots formed on the netting, but not on the meat. He said, all right, guys, air got in. No life formed on the meat. We think it's flies. They said, okay, it looks like you're right. So are you saying spontaneous generation doesn't occur? He said, no, just I don't think maggots spontaneously generate. For another 200 years, people still literally thought that spontaneous generation of life was scientifically viable. Until. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but some of you did this. If you went into your refrigerator today and you opened your refrigerator and you pulled out some milk, and you looked on the side of that, and it said it's pasteurized. You know why it says that, because the cows that produce that milk live in a... Don't say it. That's no. I always have someone who does say it, because I always want to say it myself, but no, that's not right. It's not spelled pasture. It's spelled pasture. Now, there's a big difference between that, because Pasteur is the name of a French scientist who in 1868 had a good microscope. And there were some people that were trying to say that life spontaneously generated in soup-type mixtures. Now, you know what goes on with the soup. Now, let's say you make yourself some chicken noodle soup. And you eat a bowl right after you cook it. Okay, great. And then you leave it sitting on the counter for a day. Some of you guys will eat it after a day. You women know better. My dad will put a piece of cooked sausage on the counter and come back 5 days later. Oh, ain't nothing wrong with that. All right, come back in 3 days. Chicken noodle soup in 3 days? Not refrigerated? Starting to get a little film on the top of it now, isn't it? A week? Okay, we're all out at a week. Even the most brave of us. Now, here's what's going on. If you could take a microscope and zoom in on that chicken noodle soup, it would start with... I'm sorry, I'm not trying to gross y'all out, really. Okay, this has gone too far. This has gone too far. But here, if you do, right when it was cooked, guess what you would see swimming around in there? Nothing. If you got it up to at least 160 degrees, you see nothing. On day 5, what do you see? Millions of tiny little things swimming around everywhere. Now, that's what was happening in 1860 when Louis Pasteur walked into the scientific community and said, guys, I'm going to prove to you once and for all, forever, that life doesn't spontaneously generate, not down to the microscopic level. It always comes from previously existing life. Here's what he did. He took some specially designed flasks. You can look this up. It's real common knowledge. Made it so that they had a little S-shaped curve where they would come up to a very thin S-shaped tube of glass where air could go in, but he specifically designed it so that gravity would pull all the microscopic organisms down to the bottom of the little S-shaped curve. So a film of microscopic stuff would hook to the S-shape but would not get into the meat broth. And so you could zoom in on the meat broth after day 1, after he heated up to 160 degrees for 30 seconds or so. No microscopic organisms. Day 2, nothing. Day 3, nothing. Some of them he would wait a week, not one single swimming little live creature. And then he would say, okay, now guys, we're going to break the neck off of it and let the air go straight in. And all of the microscopic organisms in the air are now going to start reproducing in the soup. Break the neck off, boom, go straight in. Microscopic organisms within seconds. Some of them, if I understand it right, some of them he would let sit for a year. Nothing until he broke the neck off. Nobody ate it. No, I don't think they volunteered to eat that. Although, you know what? When I was in the Ukraine doing some mission work, we had grape juice that you could seal hermetically in a box, and you could leave it in that box for 5 years and open it up and drink it after that 5 years, and it would still just be straight grape juice. But what was the caveat of that? Once you opened it, drink it in 2 days. That was the caveat. So, in 1868, Louis Pasteur says, I have just proven that life comes from previously existing life. And everybody says you're a genius. And the law of biogenesis is nailed down. Now, I say it's nailed down because really everybody had been knowing that before, but in order to get this godless idea of life coming from non-living chemicals, you had to come up with something that's not biologically experimental. In every single biological experiment ever done in the natural world, does life come from previously existing life? Every one. Always, for the entirety of the human scientific endeavor. Every one. Now, there's one more aspect to the law of biogenesis. Let me show you how that works. When we were moving from East Tennessee to Middle Tennessee, we had a dog. Her name was Max, and we were going to bring Max with us. Max was in the family way, and we put Max in the U-Haul truck. And I remember as a little kid, fuzzy memory, but it was very it stuck to you at the time. We took Max and we were spending a night, and it just so happened that the night we were spending, she was going to have babies. And so we took her and put her in the, I don't think we told the people, but we put her in the hotel bathtub. And the next morning we got up and looked in the hotel bathtub. And there were 8 of the most beautiful baby pygmy hippopotamuses you have ever seen. I mean, the cutest things, and we sold them. That's what funded my education at Freed-Hardeman, and it was awesome. Okay, now you don't believe that. Let me ask you a question. Were you there? How you know Max didn't give birth to 8 babies? Oh, okay, you're right. That wouldn't happen. 8 half dogs, half birds. Like, they just have feathers on one half. Okay, no. 8, 99% dog, 1% lizards, dizzards. They just had a little scale on the top of their head, and they had a forked tongue. Okay, no. What's the law of biogenesis say? Number one, life comes from previously existing life, but what's the other aspect of that? Of its own kind. Now listen to me. You have been told that Christians are anti-science, that the Bible is an anti-modern science book, and that if you believe it, you have to reject real science. That's what you've been told. Do you know that we have been doing mutation experiments on the fruit fly since 1900? All right, so that's 126 years. We've been zapping fruit flies with every mutagen we've got. Every chemical, every piece of radiation, and we have done some amazing things. Now here's the goal of the mutation of the fruit fly genome. What we're trying to do, our modern scientists are trying to do, is prove that you can take mutations and get something besides a fruit fly. Now here's the beauty of a modern fruit fly. You get a new generation every 14 days, and a brilliant scientist can pick which mutations they think are good and can stack them all up. All right, so let's do that. Let's shoot it with every bit of radiation or chemical we can and mutate the fruit fly and get it to change into what? You know what we've been able to do? We've been able to zap fruit flies so that they grow legs out of their head, or wings out of their head, or no legs, or antenna where their legs are supposed to be, or legs where their antennae are supposed to be, or 50 bristles instead of 10, or no bristles. And eventually you reach a point where they just die. They don't live. You know what we've never seen a fruit fly do? In 126 years of zapping them with everything we can, where we get to select them, and it would be the equivalent of millions and millions of years of evolution. You know what we've got? Messed up fruit flies. That's all you got. Now here's the truth, and this is the absolute scientific truth. In every instance where anybody's honest with the experimental evidence, every one, you always have life comes from previously existing life of its own kind. Every time. Now, it was known as the law of biogenesis. Nothing has changed about that except the fact that if it's true, evolution can't be true, and so now they've downgraded it to basically the suggestion of biogenesis. But here's what a law is. A law in science is when there has never been a single example that goes to the contrary of it. Do you know there's never been a single example that runs to the contrary of the law of biogenesis? Now, where did that start? You're in Genesis 1 still, I think. It took me a long time to get to Genesis 1, didn't it? But we are incorporating some Bible here. And you're going to go down to verse 13. And here's what the text is going to tell you. And the earth, well, let's go to 11 and 12. Then God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth, and it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed according to its kind. And then when you read about the flying creatures, they multiplied according to their kind. And then when you read about the swimming creatures, they multiplied according to their kind. Do you know the chicken and the egg question has always been answered by Genesis 1? God created the chicken. It had an egg, and you know what popped out of the egg? Another chicken. That's the chicken and the egg conundrum. God creates a natural world where in nature, every time, life comes from previously existing life of its own kind. Do you understand that that's the most robust biological statement that's ever been uttered? And it was in Genesis chapter 1 that Moses wrote in 1450 BC, and we didn't agree with it until Louis Pasteur came along in 1868 and proved it once and for all because we had the technology to see it. Now, is the Bible the inspired Word of God that when it talks science, it gets it right every time? Yes. Yes, it does. Now, let me give you several more examples of that. There's a law of science that you know very well, and here's why you know it. Because if you have a teenager, their room does not stay neat after you clean it. And my wife and I have a senior in high school now. Our other two have graduated. They're in college. And this particular senior was in a play. He's in a play this weekend. I got to see it last night. And then he's in a play for a couple more times this weekend. He plays tennis, and he has friends. And so his room, after my wife cleans it, stays clean for about 12, 13 seconds, and then it looks like a tornado hit it. Now, if you guys own a truck, and you always wanted this truck to be your best truck, and it's going to be your best truck, you know how long a brand new truck stays brand new? About a day. And then, you know, there's a used auto parts store that says all cars run on used parts. Well, they do from the minute you make them. And the minute you build a house, what's it start doing? Running down, and the minute the second a baby is born, what's happening? That baby is growing to maturity and then getting old like the rest of us. And what's happening there? There is something that we understand. It's called the second law of thermodynamics. Here's what the second law of thermodynamics says. Second law of thermodynamics says that in a system like ours, everything is running down. It gets less and less usable. The energy in a system gets less and less usable. Okay, now let's see how that works. You take a tree and you cut it into a log, and you take that log and you burn it. You have the same, well, we won't do the first law of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics says that matter and energy, you don't lose any energy, it just changes form. And so the same amount of energy you had before you burn the log, you have after you burn the log, it's just changed form. And some of it went to heat, some of it went to light, some of it's in ash, some of it just changes form. But here is what happens in every single chemical exchange or physical exchange, every one. You lose usable energy. And so the U.S. Patent Office has said, we are not taking any more applications for this kind of machine. What machine will the U.S. Patent Office not even consider an application for? A perpetual motion machine. You know why they won't consider an application for the perpetual motion machine? Because perpetual motion says you don't lose energy in a physical exchange. The second law of thermodynamics says, yes, you do. Stuff is wearing down. It gets less and less usable as it goes. Do you know who nailed that and actually put that into practice from the beginning of at least the fall? I want you to turn your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 1. In Hebrews chapter 1, here's what the text says. You're going to look at verse 10. And you, Lord, Hebrews chapter 1, verse 10, in the beginning laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain, and they will all grow old like a garment, like a cloak. You will fold them up, and they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will not fail. What is the Hebrews writer who's quoting the Old Testament writer saying? God, you don't lose energy. But the world, the physical entities, do. The second law of thermodynamics says stuff is wearing down. Now, we had a lot of smart people that studied the physical interactions that we see every day, and they came up with this it's actually much more technically stated than I've just stated it to you, but the bottom line is you're losing usable energy, and the Bible nails it exactly like it says right there in Hebrews chapter 1, verses 10 and following. Now, that's just one example. Now, we can keep going, and here's what I'm trying to show. When the Bible makes a statement about something physical, it's always exactly right. Let me give you another example. I want you to turn to Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6, fun chapter in some ways, tragic chapter in other ways. The world has gotten so bad that God is sending a flood. In fact, it's a flood that's going to wipe out everybody. Every thought of every person is only evil continually. And there's one man and his family who God has looked at, and they are an island of righteousness in a sea of iniquity. And Noah finds grace in the eyes of the Lord, and God comes to Noah and he says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to build this big boat. And you look right there in verse 15 of Genesis chapter 6, and here's what the boat is supposed to look like. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50, and its height 30. 300 cubits long, by 50 feet wide, by 30 feet high. Okay? Let me ask you a question. If you wanted to, in modern times, could you build a boat with that ratio, 30 to 5 to 3, length to breadth to height? Could you? Could you then see if it's a boat that would float and hold lots and lots of material? Yeah. And you could check this physically. Now, this was written in 1450 BC. And you could right now build a boat that's 30 to 5 to 3, length to breadth to height, and people have. There was a boat titled the Great Britain, named the Great Britain, that was built to this exact specification. Another one, the SS Jeremiah O'Brien, was what we called a Liberty ship in World War II. Liberty ships were designed to carry tons and tons of cargo, but they were going to have other ships that were battleships that were going to protect them, and so they didn't have to go fast. And one of them, the SS Jeremiah O'Brien, was called the Ugly Duckling because people thought that it just was not physically appealing. They just didn't like the look of it. Just so happens its ratio was very similar to 30 to 5 to 3, length to breadth to height, and that turns out to be the perfect ratio of a boat that needs to float but doesn't have to go anywhere very fast. Now, I had a guy, I put this material out to the world and challenge everybody. Hey, make a boat like this. Build it. Here's what the guy said. He's a skeptic, and he was refuting one of my videos. And he said, all right, yeah, Kyle's right. 30 to 5 to 3 is a very good ratio to build a huge boat that needs to carry a bunch of stuff. But anybody could have picked that. And this guy from whatever time Noah is living now, in fact, that's not what he said. He said the person who was writing this book just pulled 3 numbers out of the air, and they happened to be exactly right for the ratio of a boat to carry a lot of stuff. Just pulled them out of the air. You mean we've been having boat engineers for years, hundreds of years, that have tried to identify, and this guy who's writing this thousands of years ago just happens to pull the right 3 numbers out of the air? That's remarkable. You know what that says? Okay, yeah, the Bible's right. Now we're going to have to make some up to show why it's right. So how many times do you get to use he just got lucky? Just got lucky about the law of biogenesis. Just got lucky about the second law of thermodynamics. Just got lucky about... Okay, here's what we're saying. Just show me one time where the Bible didn't just get lucky. Show me one physical statement that the Bible makes that would run contrary to what we know to be scientifically true. And you can't do it. In fact, not only can you not do it, but we can show scores of examples where the Bible knew exactly what was going on before people had a clue what was happening. I'm going to give you one more for this lesson. This one, this one's so fascinating to me. I want you to turn to Numbers 19. And in Numbers 19, I just want you to hold it there because I got to tell you a story before Numbers 19. Numbers 19 is going to show us something fascinating. But before we get there, we've got to go back to the year of 1847 in Vienna, Austria. Now, the Bible, the first 5 books of the Old Testament were written in 1450 BC. So you're talking about 3,300 years before 1846 in Vienna, Austria. Okay, here's what was going on in Vienna, Austria. There's a guy by the name of Ignaz Semmelweis who was from Budapest, but he wanted to study in the city that was one of the most well-known, most renowned for their medical knowledge cities in the world, and Vienna, Austria was that city. And so he goes to Vienna, Austria, and he does exceptional. He's great at what he does. He studies hard, and they make him the lead doctor in the Division I lying-in unit of the Vienna Hospital. Now, a lying-in unit at the time, that was the phrase that they used for labor and delivery. So he's the lead doctor in one of the biggest hospitals in the world for the labor and delivery section. Now, here's his problem when he gets elevated to be the lead doctor for the labor and delivery section. He starts seeing a serious problem in the system. For many months, they'll lose 18% of all the women and children that come in. So a bright, very healthy, happy 22-year-old woman will come in. It's about time for her to give birth. 3 days later, they will take her corpse and her baby's corpse out dead. Semmelweis welcomes them into the clinic. 3 days later, they're dead. They're losing 1 out of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, you're talking 18%. You're losing 1 out of 6. Hey, if there was a hospital that was losing 18% of the mothers and kids that came into the hospital, what would happen? Investigation. And people would go to jail. Okay, that was not even in the summer. In some of the summer months, they would lose 50%. 1 out of 2. And now the mothers knew this stuff. So they would try to literally have their babies in the street gutters so they could go into Division II. Now, Division II was where the midwives took care of the women and the babies. And they only lost about 3%, 3 to 5. And so Semmelweis is looking at this system, and he's got the most educated doctors and doctor students in the world, and we're losing 18 to 50%. And he goes to the higher-ups and he says, hey, why are we losing them? They said, well, let me tell you. There's this thing up in the sky called a miasma. It's a thick cloud of bad luck, and sometimes it's thicker than others. And if it's in the winter, you know, sometimes it's thinner and we only lose 18%, but sometimes in the summer it gets real thick and we lose 50%. We wish we didn't have a cloud of bad luck hanging over our city, but we do. All right? So Semmelweis thinks scientifically, how could we validate that? Oh, well, let's send letters to Paris and see what they're doing. Paris, same deal. Hey, 18 to 50%. Well, what's y'all's explanation? Miasma. Oh, so the big cloud of bad luck over you guys too. What about London? Same. So everybody's saying they got this big miasma of junky stuff over them that gets thicker and thinner, and it's just bad luck if you happen to be when it's thick. He said, I don't believe that. So he started trying to eliminate reasons why the women would die. Now, when you look at it from a 21st century standpoint, it's humorous. For him, it was very serious. He wasn't joking. He thought this stuff would really fix stuff. So he said, number one, I think maybe if we're putting the women laying on their backs, that's the problem. We need to lay them all on their sides. So from now on, when a woman comes in, do not let them lay on their back. Put them all on their side. What happened? Not one thing. Death rate plummeted to 18% or 50%. He said, all right, might not be it. We need to. So he started changing stuff. He said, okay, here's what happens. When one of these ladies dies, we let the Catholic priest come in and offer the last rites. And when the Catholic priest comes in, he kind of comes in with some ceremony and he rings his bell. We might be scaring these women to death. No bells from now on. You cannot ring the bell when you come in at 2 a.m. I think we're scaring these women to death. Cut out the bell. What'd the death rate plummet to? 18%. Nothing. Okay, it's literally driving him insane. Literally, I've read the biography of this guy and read all kinds of stuff up on him. He was going crazy. He was literally going crazy. He would have nightmares about that young woman who came in and was so bright and shiny and healthy, and 3 days later he'd see her corpse. It was killing him. He was going crazy. So they said, "Hey, Semmelweis, simmer down, buddy. You're going to have to go out. You're going to have to take a sabbatical." So they send him on a sabbatical for 3 months to go around Europe. Hopefully he'll get a little more relaxed. And well, he comes back, and one of his best teaching friends has died. A guy by the name of Dr. Kolechka. And so Semmelweis says, "What is going on? What killed him?" They say, "Well, let me tell you the story." He was doing an autopsy on one of the bodies of one of the women who had died of labor fever, and that's what they all died of, labor fever. Said you could find pus in their eye sockets, in their chest cavities, everywhere, just labor fever. That's all they called it. And there was one of the students who was what we would call a freshman, and he was real clumsy, and he bumped Dr. Kolechka while he was doing it, and Dr. Kolechka cut his finger about 1 inch. Died within days, and we did an autopsy on him, and it looked like he had labor fever. But it couldn't have been labor fever. Semmelweis said, "I think we're passing this disease from these dead bodies to these live women." They said, "No, that's not how it works. You don't pass disease like that." He said, "Well, we're going to see." And so he said, "Okay, from now on in my clinic, here's what happens. You do not touch a live person, if you have touched a dead body, until you wash your hands in chlorinated water and you dry them on a clean towel, and then you can. Otherwise, you do not." Because you know what was happening before? He came in, and before he implemented this, he watched what was happening on a daily basis. The medical doctors and students were doing autopsies on the dead bodies. Then they were all rinsing their hands in the same bowl of water that had no germ-killing agent in it at all, and drying their hands on a dirty towel, then doing their examinations on live women. He said, "I think we might be passing it." I mean, we're looking at that thinking, yeah, you might be. But now that's from 21st century United States of America. We get to look at that. There are still some cultures that if you were to tell them this, they would have a problem processing. All right, so he said, well, the medical students don't like the way their hands smell. And so a lot of them skip washing it. So when a woman dies, and he told the nurses, "Hey guys, you have to, after a woman dies in a bed, you have to take all of the bedclothes off and everything and wash those and put them on clean before somebody else comes in and lays on that bed." Oh, so you're going to multiply our work by half and again, because you think that we're killing these women from germs? Well, they didn't even know, germs is not even the word they would use. And so when the women would die, he'd start tracing it back, and one of the nurses wouldn't want to change the clothes or change the bedclothes or wash them. Or one of the medical students didn't want to wash his hands. So he gets up in their faces and starts yelling and screaming at them and telling them they're murdering these women because they won't wash their hands. Okay, so you're a medical student, and all of the people above Semmelweis think that it's a cloud of bad luck's responsible, and this guy is telling you just murdered a woman because you didn't wash your hands. And what are you thinking? You're crazy. And so the higher-ups say, "We can't have this guy yelling at all our students like this. It's going to be a bad name for our school." So they send him back to Budapest. They say, "Get out. We kick him out." Send him back to Budapest. He goes to a little hospital in Budapest and implements the same procedures, drops the death rate to 1 to 3%. In fact, it was less than 1, if I understand it right, in the Vienna hospital, and I think it went less than 1 in Budapest. Do you know that for the rest of his life, he sent letters all over the world, to Paris, to London, everywhere, to try to get people to recognize that we were killing our women by passing germs from dead bodies to live bodies, and nobody listened to him until after he died? And he literally went insane? That was in 1847. You're talking less than 200 years ago. Okay, now, go back to Numbers. We're now in Numbers chapter 19. And lest you think that the statements in Numbers are not as interesting as you might once have thought, let's see what we can do with this one. Numbers chapter 19. Here's the rule for this stuff called the water of purification. You go there to Numbers 19, and you look at verse 2. This is the ordinance for the law that the Lord has commanded you. saying, speak to Israel, and I want you to take a heifer without blemish, in which there's no defect. Verse 3, give it to Eleazar. They take it outside the camp, and they kill it. And Eleazar the priest shall take some of the blood with his finger, sprinkle some of his blood 7 times directly in front of the tabernacle of meeting. Then take the heifer, verse 5, and burn it, its hide, its flesh, its blood, and its offal. And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet and throw them into the middle of the fire, burning the heifer. All right, so here's the rule. Take a heifer, red one, put it in a fire, burn it all completely up, throw cedar wood, hyssop, it's a plant, scarlet wool, most likely right there, because in other places it talks about it being wool, and take that and burn it all up. Okay, so great. What do we do after we burn it up? Notice what it says. Verse 9. Then a man who is clean shall take up the ashes of the heifer and store them outside the camp in a clean place. And they shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel for the water of purification. It's for purifying from sin. All right, so you take all these ashes and you store them for the water of purification. Now what do you do with the water of purification? Notice, verse 10. And the one who gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his clothes and be unclean till evening. It shall be a statute forever to the children of Israel. Verse 11. He who touches the dead body of anyone shall be unclean 7 days. He shall purify himself with water, the water of purification, on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Then he will be clean. But if he does not purify himself on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, he will not be clean. Whoever touches the dead body of anyone who has died and does not purify himself, defiles the tabernacle of the Lord, that person shall be cut off from Israel. That word cut off means killed or sent out of Israel for good, exile. Verse 18, a clean person shall take hyssop, dip it in the water, sprinkle it on the tent and on all the vessels and all the persons who were there, anybody who touched the bone or something of a dead person. All right, let's see what happens. You touch a dead person in Israel. They take these ashes from this fire, they put those ashes in water. Now, how did people used to make soap? You didn't just buy it at Walmart. You had to put something together to have some type of germ-killing agent in it. When I was a kid, probably 4th grade, we went and saw how the Pilgrims or the Frontiers people made soap. And they would burn wood, and they would take those ashes and put them in a funnel and let the rainwater run through them and catch what happens at the bottom of that? Lye. And then they would take that lye and put it in a vat of animal fat, and they'd stir it up and let it consolidate, and then they'd cut that, and that'd be their soap. So you're taking the water of purification, and you're taking these ashes and putting it in that water, and that water is forming a germ-killing agent, lye, and then you are applying it with the plant hyssop, and hyssop was put along with the heifer and the cedar in the fire, and scarlet wool. Now we'll get to that one in just a second. But you take that hyssop and you apply it with hyssop. Guess what we found hyssop has in it? If we have identified the plant correctly, and we think we have, it has a alcohol in it called thymol. Thymol is the same alcohol that's in Listerine. Let me tell you about that stuff. My dad used to use Listerine when I was a little kid. And I thought, that looks cool. It smells good too. I'm going to try that. You know how long as a, 7-year-old I can hold Listerine in my mouth? 0.01 seconds is how long that lasted. What is going on when your mouth is burning with that Listerine? It's literally killing the cells of your mouth along with every bacteria that happens to be attached to those cells. So we've got a plant that has thymol in it. We've got ashes that produce lye. And then why would you put scarlet wool in there? Well, have you ever been tortured as a child? When what I mean by that is your mom made you wear woolen pants that was close to the summer or to a church building where there was going to be some heat on, and you ran around and, okay, wool is not fun to have close to your skin. There's a reason why they don't make undershirts out of wool, generally speaking. It's itchy, scratchy. Okay, if you're a mechanic and ivory is not going to get all the grease off of your hands, what do you got to go to? There's two good soaps that you can go that's a step beyond ivory. Gojo or what? Lava, okay, or fast orange. Okay, what's the texture of Gojo, lava or fast orange? Gritty? All right, you put a bunch of wool in there, and there's a bunch of little burnt wool fibers in there, and you put in the water purification, and now you've got lye, you're applying it with hyssop, and you've got wool that's in there, that's little bitty wool fibers, and you put it on somebody's body, and they've got to scrub it off on day 3, and then you give them 3 days to dry, and then you apply it again, and then they can touch a live person. Now, let me ask you this question. It's a series of questions you can ask. If in 1847, Ignaz Semmelweis didn't know what chlorine did, and he copied the recipe in Numbers 19, would he have saved millions of lives worldwide if they all did it? Yeah, he would have. And if you went to a primitive culture right now that didn't understand anything about germs and said, hey, I'm not expecting you to know anything about this, just do this. Just do this. How did Moses happen to get it right in 1450 BC when we didn't even know it until 1847? And even then, we were so hard-headed as a culture, we didn't even believe it for another 40 years. What, Moses just got lucky? Now, let's ask this question. Why is it a red heifer? You know, the color of the heifer doesn't have anything to do with the medicinal power of the water purification. But throughout the entirety, from Genesis to Revelation, there is a red crimson cord that runs through the Old Testament to the end of Revelation that is trying to get you to look at the great physician. Now, you can keep a person alive physically by putting the water purification on them and making sure they don't touch another live body for 7 days, but you can't heal a person spiritually that way. And the red heifer signifies the blood that it takes to cover a sin, but the blood of bulls and goats can't forgive a sin. You've got to have something purer and something that was voluntarily offered and something that comes from a sinless sacrifice. And the red heifer is there to remind us that the crimson cord leads directly to Jesus Christ. Now, the Old Testament gives you instructions on how you could literally have kept people alive. But the New Testament gives you instructions on how you can keep people alive eternally. And the question tonight is, okay, hey, if you were in a primitive culture and you didn't have chlorine, do what the Numbers 19 says, you'll keep people alive. But what's more important is the fact that every one of us have sin on our souls. And if we're going to get that sin off, this hasn't been an evangelistic lesson per se, and I haven't gotten to explain a lot of the intricacies of God's plan of salvation, but ultimately what they boil down to is, if you believe in Jesus Christ and are willing to repent of your sins and confess that He is the Son of God, and then be buried in water baptism for the forgiveness of those sins, the point at which you voluntarily as a believer go under that water is the point at which you are buried into His death according to Romans chapter 6, and that's when you contact His blood. And the blood of bulls and goats could never forgive a sin, but the blood of Jesus Christ can forgive everybody's who will follow His plan of salvation. So the question tonight is there something deeper you need to be thinking about than, hey, yeah, you could save lives with this. Yeah, but we can save souls with the blood of the great physician. Is your soul in need of that cleansing? And if it is, tonight, according to the Bible, now, today, is the day of salvation. How much longer do you want to live with a potentially terminal, eternal disease? Don't let it be another day. As we stand and as we sing.